devil's in the details, of course. How do you pay for all this?
Right, the pay-fors. That's always, whenever we're talking about tax legislation or anything like that, it's always the pay-fors.
Are there any?
I saw some positive comments from liberal groups saying, this is great. And then what about more taxes on the rich? Like trying to prod her a little bit farther on that. So I think we might see some more, advocacy along those lines.
That's the answer from Democrats, though, right? Soak the rich so we can pay for these programs. Kate, it's interesting, $25,000 for more than 1 million first-time home buyers. That's a lot of taxes on rich people. Does she need to talk about controlling government spending? Because that was not part of the address today, was it?
No, I mean, I don't know if she does, Joe, right? That's been the big question over the past number of years. Is this something that voters really care about? I mean, it seems like based on the speech today and what the vice president outlined and how, frankly, how little she talked about how she would pay for it, I think she's betting that voters are just a lot more interested in hearing about what the proposals would be to help them, right? And worrying about how much it would cost later on. But, to their credit, I think, as Kate was saying, I mean, Democrats have talked about taxes on the wealthy as a way to pay for these programs. I mean, if we look at the proposals on the Republican side for reducing taxes, there's not a lot of detail either from them on how they would offset that reduced revenue. So no one really talking about debt.
On either side.
On either side, exactly.
Of the aisle, we should note. No pay-fors in Donald Trump's economic speech, other than grow our way out of it, which is not always the easiest thing to do. It's a lot easier to say. The idea of a federal ban on price gouging, Kate, would that require a Democratic sweep of the House and Senate?
If it were to be enacted, if it were to be legislation.
Talk about this, but how do you do it?
And we've already seen Republicans Republican organizations put out statements and say things panning this idea, saying that this is just more of the same types of policies that led to the high inflation of the past couple of years. House Speaker Mike Johnson, obviously a Republican, said that this was kind of just a more radical version of some of the what he called the Biden-Harris policies, now the Harris-Walz policies, being more radical, and that would lead to another round of high inflation.
Sounds like it's safe to say, and we don't have all the details on both candidates' plans, but both would be potentially adding to the deficit and therefore inflationary. Is that safe to say?
I think it's too early to say. I mean, if the Harris campaign, if Kamala Harris wins and they put forward a plan for how to pay for all these things, I mean, they could offset those costs. But really, it also comes down to, of course, who has control of the Senate and the House, what happens in Congress. I mean, we saw even when Democrats were in control, they couldn't get everyone in their party or enough people in the Senate to agree to these kinds of big sweeping proposals or for tax increases. And that sort of forced President Biden to dial back on his plan. So we could see some of that later, too. There's no guarantee that all of this would be enacted.
Far from. This was about vision, I think, right? More than details. But I'll tell you what, when you drill down on some of the details today and then look at the data we got this morning, it's an interesting situation with consumer sentiment rising for the first time in 5 months. But, Kate, part of the reason why, as we learned, was Joe Biden's decision to drop out of the race. What do you make of that?
Well, I guess, for him, it's probably doesn't sound like good news.
I would love to hear that about myself. No. The nation's feeling more optimistic without you.
Right.
You can't deny it, though. When you look at the curve here, people started feeling better right around the time he left the race.
There's definitely been a surge of enthusiasm among Democratic voters and people who are aligned with the Democratic Party. I mean, we've seen all kinds of enthusiasm and more people wanting to go to the convention in the past few weeks. That people, I talked to somebody today that said, I've just made a last-minute decision to go, a D.C. lobbyist. Wow. So, even the lobbyists don't want to be left,
oh God, what are we in for?
Left behind. So there is more enthusiasm, and it may be some of that, seeing a little bit more optimism from people who are aligned with Democrats.
Well, God knows it'll be a sea of humanity next week, but we had numbers on housing today as well, Kate. The lowest housing construction since May of 2020. I don't know if you remember May of 2020, but that was not a good time for the housing market. So does this homeowner assistance plan or some of the proposals she has to increase construction, did they ring true when you look at the reality in this market?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly there seems to be agreement that there needs to be more done to address the housing supply issue, right? I mean, obviously affordability, which is what she's really targeting, seems to be with this subsidy, is important. But if there are not enough homes to buy, if there's not enough supply, that's what's pushing up prices. I mean, that's a problem that at one point or another needs to be addressed. And the Biden administration has tried to sort of take some smaller steps to figure this out, but definitely. It's not surprising, especially where rates are as well, that we're starting to see that taking more and more of a bite out of the housing market.
Well, it's interesting. You guys remember 2007, the subprime mortgage crisis. A lot of people were pushed into homes, encouraged to buy homes for the first time, who probably shouldn't have been owning homes. When you're offering $25,000 to more than 1 million first-time home buyers, don't you risk creating another scenario like that?
Well, what Republicans are saying, and some economists are saying, is that it just means everybody put up add $25,000 to the value of your home. That it's just going to sort of, which, that could be good or bad, depending on where you sit. But
not if you're buying one.
Her proposal also kind of put Wall Street on notice. She said, you wanted to basically ban the big, big Wall Street investors come in and buy a big chunk of housing and then boost the prices. So there are some other things in there, kind of a populist theme that we've seen also on the Republican side a little bit. But, we're seeing that as a response to some of these difficulties in the home sales.
She talked about cost of a loaf of bread up 50%, ground beef up 50%. This is not a George H.W. Bush with the gallon of milk here. But she also talked about her time as AG in California. Now, this is interesting. 4 years ago, that was held against her politically. Now she's running on it and told the crowd today, I will go after the bad actors. I will work to pass the first federal ban on price gouging on food. She said, as AG in California, I went after companies that illegally increased prices, and I won more than $1 billion for consumers. Is that a winning line?
Well, I think that she's betting that voters, I guess, want to hear more tough talk on what is going to be done about prices. Of course, we know, Joe, prices are unlikely to come down to actually fall. That would be deflation. What we're seeing right now is disinflation. And broadly speaking, I mean, you don't see, there's a reason why we're not paying, the same price for a loaf of bread that we did in 1980. I mean, there is inflation. It ticks up a little bit every year. And we saw it soar. It's come back down. And I think that the Biden administration had been touting that progress, but it just clearly was not ringing true for a lot of voters. And so I think Harris is shifting a little bit. She's kind of going back to or leaning into a message that, yes, I see you and I hear that you're still struggling and I'm going to do more about it.